Greetings and salutations. So our first rhetorical appeal, and I think the most important one, is logos, or the logical appeal. That's where we get our word logic from. There are really two main types of logos. The first is hard evidence. If you're trying to persuade or convince somebody, giving them evidence really, really helps. Facts are obviously important, right? Facts are things that everybody agrees upon. So the sun rises in the east, it sets in the west, right? We want facts whenever possible. Sometimes we need to make use of statistics, surveys, and polls. And when we're reading Angela Lee Duckworth's book, Grit, as a psychologist, she uses a lot of statistics, surveys, and polls. And the difference between a fact and a statistic is this. If you imagine we ask 10 dentists what their favorite toothpaste is, and they say nine of them say Crest, well, that's not the same thing as a fact. I mean, it is a fact that those 9 said, but that doesn't mean 9 out of all 10 dentists do. But if I have 100 dentists, that's more reliable than 10. If I have 1,000 dentists, that's more reliable than 10 or 100. If I have 1,000,000 dentists, right, that becomes even more reliable information. And so statistics, surveys, and polls are only as good as the sample size, as the if they're representative, right? Or do we just pick dentists who happen to really, really like Crest? Or are they representative of all dentists all over the world, right? And so those statistics are helpful, but it's also important to know that they're not exactly the same thing as a fact. Interviews, testimonies, and narratives may be factual, but they may be something where if you're interviewing somebody, that person may be the exception that proves the rule, right? And so interviews are important, testimonies are important, but it's not, again, the same thing as a hard fact. But those are all types of hard evidence that you can use to persuade or convince somebody of a claim that you're making. Now, the second type is reason and common sense. We don't always have facts to prove certain things, but we can think through something logically, reasonably, and persuade people that way. And so logic equals systematic, careful reasoning. In fact, there are classes that are all about logic, especially in the field of philosophy, where it's almost like a math class. It's almost like math at times, because as you're really thinking through logic. And so an example of this is the syllogism. Now, you may have never heard the term syllogism, but you may be familiar with the example. So if A equals B and B equals C, then A must equal C, right? And that's what I mean about it looks a lot like math. In fact, when you look at geometric proofs, if you're taking a geometry class, those are really connected in many ways to classic logic. And so the classic example of classic logic is all human beings are mortal. Socrates, the ancient Greek philosopher, is a human being. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. A more modern example, if RCC is a college and you are an RCC student, you are in college. And so I want to share a couple of examples of these from Grit by Angela Duckworth. On page 1, they're both from page 147 in a section, her chapter called Purpose. And so here she's talking about the extensive research she's doing. Now she's focused on surveys that she has done, right? But what you'll see is how extensive her surveying is, right? To probe the motivations that underlie Grit, I recruited 16,000 American adults. So we're not seeing people from other countries, we're not seeing children, we're not seeing teenagers, but we are seeing adults who are American. So we know that they're not necessarily representing other groups, but they are representing Americans pretty well, because 16,000 is a good size number, right? And she asked them to complete the Grit scale. From these responses, we generated scores ranging from 1 to 5 for their orientations to purpose and pleasure, respectively. And her conclusion from this was grittier people are dramatically more motivated than others to seek a meaningful, other-centered life. And on the page after, she includes a graph that shows the connections between grit and pleasure and purpose. Purpose being caring about other people, being motivated to help others. Now, she also uses on the very same page reason and common sense. She doesn't provide any hard evidence to support it, but she leads us through a logical thought process that I think is pretty reasonable. And so while one might expect successful people to be self-centered, Duckworth reasons that other-centeredness can actually benefit us. Then, quote, human beings have evolved to seek meaning and purpose. Why? Because the drive to connect with and serve others also promotes survival. How? Because people who cooperate are more likely to survive than loners. And again, this is on the same page. And so you can see that these are not opposing methods of convincing your reader. You can really weave them together. Sometimes you don't have hard evidence, but you have logic, you have reason, you have common sense. You can kind of walk people through your thought process and convince them that way. But other times you may have data that you can back it up with. So we'll continue to talk about other kinds of rhetorical appeals that also work with, not against, logic.